Bien, à nouveau, bonjour à tous.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope everybody enjoyed lunch. I hope everybody enjoyed their work and lunch. Do I get the green light for starting? The technical team approves. Let's get down to brass tacks, people. This is session number 3. We'll look at the jobs market. It's a twofold session with two different segments. First of all, a number of addresses and at the rostrum, and then the roundtable between ministers. A couple of prerequisite announcements, the same things that I said this morning, but maybe some of you weren't here. I apologize in advance if I mispronounce your names. Unfortunately, I'm not fluent in every single language represented here today. Far from it. And also, the clock is ticking, particularly since we are starting slightly behind schedule, so I'm going to ask that everybody please stick to the allotted time. As I did this morning, I may have to interrupt an address if it overspills too much. I know it's frustrating because we have so much to say and it's a bit unpleasant. Unfortunately, the clock is ticking. We have to make sure everybody gets heard. So, without further ado, we will hear from Katarina Ivankovich-Nezevich, Director in charge of Social Rights and Inclusion at DG Employment at the European Commission. I'm going to ask that you please settle in the same order that I'm calling on you to join us on stage. It'll be easier. And then we will hear from Michael O'Flaherty, Director of the European Agency for Fundamental Rights, and also Johannes Kopf, Chair of the European Network of Public Employment Services, Charlie Nicolas, Deputy Director of Pôle Emploi, the French Jobs Center, and Thomas Vignal, Deputy General Director in charge of Services Provision at Pôle Emploi. But before we get started, we have a video address by Nicolas Schmidt. He couldn't be here with us in person. He's the European Commissioner for Jobs and Social Rights at the European Commission. Minister, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to start by extending my congratulations and my thanks to the French presidency, and more specifically to you, Minister, for organizing this event on a key challenge. How do we make sure that persons with disabilities can access their rights? People with disabilities must be fully included in order for them to fully participate in society. And this is also helpful in ensuring a fairer economy. As a result, this conference is yet a new milestone in our ongoing efforts to promote more inclusive societies and economies. For a number of years now, the European Commission has undertaken to promote the rights of persons with disabilities by fighting all forms of discrimination. Equality is a core European value. The European strategy for the rights of people with disabilities for the 2021-2030 decade, a strategy that we kicked off in March 2021, aims specifically at improving living conditions for persons with disabilities and ensure their full inclusion within the European Union as well as outside the EU. The action plan on the European Pillar of Social Rights also seeks to ensure inclusion of persons with disabilities across society, and particularly on the jobs market. To that end, the European Commission will initiate measures to promote employment of persons with disabilities, and those initiatives are in line with one of the 7 flagships of this strategy. Today's discussions will enable you to determine the main thrusts of that policy, which will be actively pursued under the Czech presidency. And this also means that every member state must contribute to the success of that strategy, in particular by adopting, by 2024, a number of national targets for the employment rate of people with disabilities. And those targets include reducing employment rate gaps, which are still particularly high and completely unacceptable. Accessibility is also one of the topics on today's agenda. Accessibility is a key factor in the daily lives of persons with disabilities. Yes, inroads have been made for improving accessibility, but many obstacles remain. Our overarching objective should be to implement European legislation on accessibility at country level. Ensuring accessibility does not just mean ensuring equal opportunity. It also means ensuring equal opportunity in terms of employment and full participation in society. The use of ICTs, information and communications technologies, as well as digital technologies, breaks new ground on this front. By providing those opportunities in the areas of employment, education, training, particularly training in digital technologies, and also ensuring social inclusion, we will be able to achieve what seems to me is the most precious thing: independent living. Our shared goal is to build more inclusive and more supportive societies where every individual gets to grow, to make plans, and to thrive. And that is a battle that we wage every single day. And that battle requires that we raise awareness and agree on inputs. This conference is, I'm sure, highly instrumental, and for that, congratulations. So there was Nicola Schmidt. So nobody will stand at the rostrum, contrary to what I said before. You're all sitting next to me, which is good. That way I feel less lonely. Let's talk about employment. The first speaker has 7 minutes. 7 minutes tops.
I will keep 7 minutes, even less. And in order to do that, I might skip what I'm pretty sure the other speakers are going to refer. And this is how we see the present state of play with persons with disabilities in regard to the employment and employment opportunities. And I would really like to focus on what employment package is. Maybe just before I really go into the employment package, just one figure which really I think obliges us, all of us, to act and to act rapidly, is the fact that the employment gap and the employment rate between persons with disabilities and persons without disabilities is huge. It is around 24.5%, was in 2020. And those persons with disabilities who are employed are often leaving the workforce earlier. This is one of the elements that we always like to emphasize when discussing persons with disabilities, and Commissioner Dalli this morning was reflecting on the fact that we need to set employment targets for persons with disabilities in 2024, and this package is actually meant to help in this regard. So when we look at the strategy for the rights of persons with disabilities, we speak about 7 flagships, 64 actions, 13 calls for the member states. But so what is employment package? It's one of the flagships, but it's one of the flagships with 6 different areas of actions. And these 6 different areas of actions have not been chosen just per se. They have been chosen based on the really in-depth consultation process during the preparation of the strategy, elaborated from the various stakeholders, and I'm pretty sure that we will hear a lot about it today. And these 6 areas have different concrete actions that will be implemented under each of the area. So first, briefly, I will give you the overview of these different areas. First is promoting hiring perspectives through affirmative action and combating stereotypes. And I'm pretty sure that all of you will agree that it is extremely important to examine the positive actions, and it's also important to facilitate the hiring of persons with disabilities involving employers and employer initiatives. And this first action will be a sort of register of these good practices and of the good strategies already proven, also of the good practices to combat the stereotypes, making sure that there are visible approaches for better information, for accessible, for inclusive recruitment procedures, and also really reflecting on the positive experience when it comes to the quota systems. And this is one of the elements that will continue throughout the implementation of the strategy. But this we have seen as really first element we need to tackle when speaking about employment of persons with disabilities. Then we have the second strand, which is strengthening capacities of employment and integration services. And this part of the work is going to be done together with the Public Employment Services Network, so-called PES network, and also with CEDEFOP, CareersNet, which is going to, and we are going to provide an analysis and good practices regarding the public employment services for job seekers with disabilities and also for employers when it comes to the career guidance for persons with disabilities along the life course. We have seen various practices in the member states. In some public employment services, you have a specific units dedicated to employment of persons with disabilities. Some employment services do have a dedicated counselors who are then providing an additional support. And I'm sure that we will hear a lot about PES network and how they can help and mainstream this work. Then the third strand will be ensuring reasonable accommodation at work. And we will, together with our experts of a group of experts for work with persons with disabilities, are going to analyze the reasonable accommodation at work in different jobs involving all the relevant stakeholders. And in this respect, we will provide a guidance on the best practices when it comes to the reasonable accommodation. And to that end, we have already started collecting the guidance and practices in the member states. And those of you who have been following disability a bit longer, you might remember our communication campaign that ended 2 years ago, which focused on combating stereotypes in employment. And one of the main activities of this campaign was providing an examples of good reasonable accommodation. Then the fourth element for which we are working closely with our colleagues from EU OSHA is securing health and safety at work, contributing to prevent disabilities. This is something I believe which we believe it would be a good way for managing, for example, chronic diseases or preventing the risks of acquiring disabilities with a view of frequent chronic diseases. This is one of the elements where we have many analysis studies, but on the very sporadical elements relevant to the managing, for example, of the chronic diseases or for the prevention. And it is something that our colleagues from EU OSHA, which is, the Agency for Occupational Health and Safety, are working a lot and are helping us in this regard. The fifth strand, 2 minutes. Okay. Fifth area of intervention is securing vocational rehabilitation schemes in case of chronic diseases or accidents. And the sixth one is, I think, very important for all, especially for the persons with disabilities, and I'm going to mention it and close my speech. It is exploring jobs in sheltered employment and pathways to open labor market. And pathways to open labor market is a key word in this respect, and this is where we plan to guide and where our activities are going to be guided in this respect. Here we have a big support from the civil society, who is often one of the employers of persons with disabilities. We work a lot with our social economy actors in this respect, and I'm sure Action Plan for Social Economy is helping a lot, but this is one of the areas where we do believe there is still a huge potential in this regard. So I will stop here, Sophie, and I hope I was just about around 7 minutes. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Désolée de vous embêter. I'm so sorry for cutting you short, but thank you so much. And now let's hear from Michael O'Flaherty, Director of the European Agency for Fundamental Rights in Europe. Same as before, 7 minutes tops. Thank you very much, Sophie. Minister Klusell, dear Minister, dear colleagues, I'm delighted to be here with you today.
Of the experience of discrimination in the workplace experienced by people with disabilities, and I'm pleased to put to you today some findings that have not yet been published and which will be at the heart of a major publication of ours on the topic in September of this year. But let me jump right in. We have discovered through new survey work of ours that the experience of discrimination in the workplace of the general population is 3%. But then, when we go to people with disabilities, we find that of people who are severely limited in daily activity, the discrimination experience jumps up to a startling 46%. In terms of people with less severe limitations, it's still at an unacceptable level of 34%. We can go further. When we ask people across Europe if they have experienced a discriminatory act in the workplace in the past year, in the general population, the answer is 1%. In the population of people severely limited in daily activities, it is 34%. We also now know that it's no longer just anecdotal. The experience is worse for women. Also, interestingly, we have found that the experience of discrimination is more evident seeking work rather than in the workplace. And then, very disturbingly, we have shocking levels of reporting of discrimination incidents, typically 2 in 10. When we ask why, we're told that it's because of low levels of awareness of where to go with your complaint and a lack of confidence that anything will be done about it. And a word of caution before moving from this point: if we only have 2 in 10 incidents reported, then reporting of incidents is a poor guide for policy responses. Now, what can we do? Obviously, we have to do a better job of investing in the data. We're doing it at an EU level. It's very patchy at national levels, and it doesn't take account of the intersectionality of experience. It doesn't reach out to people at the edges of our societies. They are quite literally lost from the statistics. And of course, we also have to challenge prejudice in our societies. The experience in the workplace is in large part because of patterns of prejudice and, frankly, ignorance from your workplace colleagues. And let me wrap up my observations today by saying that perhaps the golden key to doing better, to tackling discrimination effectively, is by more enthusiastically adopting the rights-based approach. We've mentioned the UN CRPD so many times today. Article 27 is a sturdy guarantee of non-discrimination in the workplace. We could mention the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. So it's heavily there in the human rights laws that our states embrace. But have we embraced that sufficiently as the culture of our approach? There are some core principles of a human rights approach which could help us mark a much more efficient pathway towards our objectives. For instance, the principle of normativity. It's law. It's not charity. It's not niceness. It's not even just the economic argument. It's binding law, and we have to insist on it on that basis. Second, these laws demand universality of the enjoyment of rights. A reminder that everybody, whichever person with a disability, no matter how much on the margins of society, must be embraced in our efforts. Nobody left behind. Third, the principle of indivisibility. And maybe that's the way to pull all the elements of today together. The fact that you cannot fix one aspect of your human experience without fixing the others. Or to put it another way, you won't succeed in any one aspect unless you address all. That's why education is critical for work. Housing, even, is critical for everything. And they must all be tackled in a joined-up manner to bring the results that we need. And fourth of the principles that's unavoidable when you put human rights at the heart is participation. Again, we've mentioned it today as a good practice, but it's a law-based, a binding requirement that rights holders are participants in the processes that impact them. And so quite literally, it has to be a lot less for people and an awful lot more with people. And the final principle I'd mention, which derives so closely from the putting of the human rights approach at the center, is accountability. Now, accountability works on many levels: national, regional, international. I'll just mention one today, and that is that in 2 years' time, literally 2 years from this month, the EU will be before the UN CRPD committee. It will be held accountable for its record and its achievement, its second review before the UN committee. So we have just 24 months to get it right. And so my challenge to us all today is to make a global good practice, present a Europe of which we can be proud. And I can assure you of the support and solidarity of the Fundamental Rights Agency in that project. Thank you.
Merci. Merci beaucoup. Thank you. Thank you so much, Michael. And now we're going to hear from Johannes Kopf from the European Network of Public Employment Services. We'd love to hear your thoughts, sir.
Dear ministers, ladies and gentlemen, as you heard, my name is Johannes Kopf. I'm the head of the Austrian PES and also the chair of the already known PES network, of the network of the Public Employment Services. For those who are not familiar with my organization, we are the network of the 27 public employment services in the European Union and Iceland, Norway, and Liechtenstein. So we are 30. And what do we do? I mean, it's in fact all about getting better together. So it's really the most important point is sharing best practices. And this is also a very important point for the integration of people with disabilities, of course. As we heard this morning from Madame the Commissioner, the pandemic increased inequalities and amplifies challenges in tackling discrimination, of course, and every crisis does this. I don't even want to think about people with disabilities right now in the Ukrainian. This is the negative effect we have to fight against. But on the other hand, looking on it optimistic, there is the last 2 years has also offered some new opportunities, especially, for instance, through the accelerated digitalization. There is a new open, I would say, horizon for some of the job seekers with disability. Integrating people with disability in the labor market is, of course, a core task of the public employment services. So it's not, it's absolutely no new topic. But I think there is now a good momentum a real momentum for get improvement in that field, because we are in times of a skill shortage. And we already feel that a lot of employers are really searching for skilled workforce, and there we can offer people with disabilities. So it's easier now to talk with employers than it was the years before. To start the topic with, we launched a survey a few months ago, and more than 2/3 of the public employment services have a main or a significant role in integrating and supporting the inclusion of job seekers with disabilities. In most cases, it is shared with other authorities, which is not making this easier, of course, not only for us, but also for the people with disabilities. In many cases, there are many authorities in charge for the integration. And this is all in all a complex systems, I'd like to say. So every example where there is more simplicity is a best practice example, I would say. As we already heard from the Commission, thank you, Katharina, there are several PES with specialized caseworkers in that field. In a few countries, you have even specific units. I think this is a good example to have specialized caseworkers, and we should have more of that in Europe. Madam Commissioner Dalli also was calling for more staff for the integration, for PES, for the integration of people with disabilities. I think this is an important point, and I really like to renew the call also to the ministers that are here today. Of course, we have the classical toolbox. There is the sheltered employment, wage subsidies, vocational education, supported employment, and so on. What's not so familiar in all the PES is follow-up support after placement. This is, I would say, an interesting idea, maybe for this or the other country, to help the people stay in the jobs after integration. Of course, more and more PES started also to, I would say, overcome barriers. Tackling the multiple barriers is also a topic. Michael already said discrimination is a big topic. Let me start with cultural barriers, negative perceptions, and so on. And this is about training of staff. There is a very good example from the German Public Employment Service with an awareness-raising workshop and process within the Bundesagentur. And the Swedish Public Employment Service, for instance, launched a large communication campaign inviting employers to focus more on skills rather than on the disabilities of job seekers. Of course, we all of us have still barriers also in our own services. It's about easier access via online appointments. It's about accessible websites, procedures, guided coaching, and so on. And a clear best practice in that field is involving persons with disabilities directly in the design of our measures. This is something that is not everywhere in Europe done. So this is really a good example. The Estonian Public and Service, for instance, launched a big initiative to encourage job seekers with disabilities to register with the PES. Within the next PES board meeting, we will also look at that example because this is a very interesting example. So it's, like always in our network, about exchanging best practices. Institutional barriers are also has to be tackled. There are specialized counselors in my organization in Austria, but not for the job-seeking people only, but also for the employers. Employers need also counselors in the integration of people with disabilities. So these are only a few examples of the efforts of the PES. You might find many more examples in our online knowledge center of the PES network. Soon you will also find a report, PES measures to address labor market discrimination in the toolkit. And really like to invite you to look at these measures. It could help people integrate in the market. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup pour ce partage de bonnes.
Thank you very much for sharing these best practices. We are going to continue with the French single employment service with you, Charline Nicolas. You're one of the assistant director. Yes, thank you very much, Madam Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. In view of my functions, I'm going to be extremely practical today, but if you will allow me, I would like to say that people with disabilities in France have twice as much unemployment as the rest of the active population in France. In 2019, we decided in the strategic project of France, there was a return of people with disabilities to employment. It was a decision of the government to have this inclusive society and to simplify the public service for employment, which is one of the directions if we really want to have an inclusive society. This means, first of all, appropriate services for these people with disabilities, but it also means that all this has to be streamlined into common services, common rights services. We have to bring a response in terms of individual compensation, but we must also introduce a more general change in the working environment to make it accessible to all and therefore inclusive. As I only have a few minutes, let me mention two major actions that we lead in Pôle emploi. First of all, the simplification of the journey for people with disabilities, and secondly, the accessibility for all our users to our services to make this access to rights more effective. Talking about the simplification of the journey towards employment, we have pulled the services of Pôle emploi and Cap emploi upon request from the French government. Cap emploi means 78 associations throughout the French territory specialized in supporting people with disabilities towards employment. And to be honest, these associations used to support a quarter of the job seekers and Pôle emploi the other three quarters with a completely separated or silo logic. With this coordination of the two organizations since 2019, we have decided to get rid of this silo logic and therefore help these people with disabilities. What does it mean in practice? We simplified procedures and we also, and in 70% of the 852 agencies of Pôle emploi, people with disabilities no longer have to go to different places. They can go to any Pôle emploi agency where they can find an advisor, a counselor from Pôle emploi or Cap emploi who will be appropriate to handle their situation. Therefore, these people do no longer have to go to two networks, to the procedures twice. We have a single system which simplifies their journey. And therefore, the job seekers can benefit from the whole offer of service, first of all, of the common services of Pôle emploi with people who are trained to support them, but they can also get specialized advice depending on the nature or of their disability or their needs at a specific moment. So we start from a diagnosis. In this new offer of service, we really decided to strengthen this diagnostic phase, taking into account right from the start the elements linked to the disability. And this is very important for the implementation of the compensation rights. You were talking about regulations. This is really the implementation of a legal framework. And then throughout the Pôle emploi, Cap emploi journey, the person is supported. So this meant a cultural change of our advisors and also training for them. So I believe that it's much more than an institutional change. It's a real revolution, and we're starting to see the first results with the job seekers with disabilities seem to show their satisfaction, and the counselors also seem quite satisfied with this solution. Second direction, which I mentioned, is to make all these services accessible to users with disabilities. It's a legal obligation in France. So first of all, accessibility, must be streamlined as from the start of the project, so that things do not come as an afterthought. Second conviction: accessibility is indispensable for people with disabilities, and it benefits all users, in fact. We have made a lot of progress over the past few years through practical actions, including the accessibility of the agencies for people with reduced mobility, but we need to do even more, if I may say so. And in 2000, we adopted an action plan that will enable to guarantee the digital accessibility of all our services, offer an inclusive hosting with the self-diagnosis in agencies, and also support for people with cognitive disabilities. To conclude, I will say that the public service for employment in France has a responsibility, and we're perfectly aware of it. And in order to do this and develop our actions, we base ourselves on three main principles. First of all, all our actions are user-centered, always guided by an objective of results. Secondly, innovation, constant innovation in cooperation with our partners and users. And thirdly, maybe it's not part of the topic today, but we must be exemplary as public services and as an employer. We have a higher rate of employment of people with disabilities than the compulsory one. Thank you very much, Charline Nicolas. Now has come the time to listen to Tsuma Bial, who is in charge of service providers for people with disabilities. Good afternoon, dear ministers. I'm going to speak English, in fact.
A European network which brings together basically the non-profit social economy services that help people with disabilities on the labour market, in their day-to-day lives, in education, and so forth. So I was very happy to hear previously our role in the initiative by the European Commission, but also the work that you do in France between the public employment services and the associations and the social economy to really find solutions, because there is a lot of expertise in the social economy and we really need to make the most of it. So for us, it has been mentioned, the UNCRPD is our compass. I will say it again, because it should be the compass of everybody. And right now, as a sector, we are not there. As a sector, as a society, we are not there. That's why we really need to make sure that Article 27 is at the heart of our policy making, but also for us as employers, as trainers, as job coaches, of our day-to-day work. We mentioned a bit the employment gap for people with disabilities. That is true, but in fact the situation is probably worse. That number does not count people who are considered inactive, and in some countries many people with disabilities are considered inactive even though in other countries they work. So that is something to look into. It also does not look into the quality of the jobs that are being created, and that is also something that we need to look for. So I'm going to talk a bit about some of the practices that are needed to make sure that the system works in some ways. Of course, we need anti-discrimination laws. That's the start, that's the basis. They also need to be put in practice. Awareness raising is probably one of the most important aspects of it. Quota systems can be also part of the solution, but one aspect is often not mentioned enough is reasonable accommodation. And reasonable accommodation is a change to a job or a work environment that can help people with disabilities apply for the jobs. So it's not just in job, but apply for the jobs, to perform in the job so they can actually do their jobs, but also to advance, to have career progression, to have perspectives like many of us have in our jobs. It's also a right. It's a right under international law, under the UN Convention. It's also a right under EU law, under Article 5 of the Anti-Discrimination Directive. Any worker with a disability can request reasonable accommodation. What's important here is that it should not impose disproportionate burden on the employer, but there are ways in which we can do that. There's ways which can facilitate that process, including through EU law. Reasonable accommodation has a strong relationship with accessibility. and sometimes it's difficult to know which is which, but it's not that difficult. It's what can we do to make sure that a person with a disability can work in the environment and make career progression within certain, let's say, reasonable ways. There are some technical solutions that can include elevators, ramps. It can include computer software, more and more. But there are also other elements, and we don't really talk often enough about reasonable accommodation for people with intellectual disabilities, and what does that mean? And in this situation, it could be support on the job, for example. It could be also training staff, training the employer, training the human resources departments to make sure that they are also aware of how to work in a particular situation. What is reasonable? Reasonable, and here I have to admit, I stole it a bit from this EU guide on reasonable accommodation, but it was very good. What is reasonable? Will it work? Will the reasonable accommodation work? That's important. Is it practical? Is it unsustainable? I mean, can we pay for it? Can we afford it? If there are costs, are the external resources available, primarily from the state? And will it disrupt the ongoing services? The good news for everyone is that reasonable accommodation works. It's usually inexpensive. There's lots of subsidies in most EU countries to cover some of the costs that can come. And there's also a lot of specialist expertise that's available in each of our countries within, let's say, the more specialized employment services, so social economy, not only, but I'm sure also in public employment services, there's a lot of this expertise. We've also done a piece of research a few years ago that showed that it looked into the economic analysis of what are the costs to pushing for a more inclusive labor market. Because a lot of these things may seem expensive, but is it really worth it? And the feedback that we got is that there is no full return on investment. That's not true, but there are many significant savings that can be made for the state in terms of benefits and things like this for the state if you push for a more inclusive society. I have 2 minutes left. I will now move a bit more on to the EU's role, and actually the EU has, and particularly the Commission, has many policies that are useful instruments that can help you as member states to really create more inclusive labour markets. The first is public procurement. 14% of EU GDP is public procurement. Public procurement under EU law allows member states, allows public authorities to reserve contracts for companies that employ people with disabilities. It allows them to have social criteria, again, related to employment or accessibility aspects. Public procurement is really underused to really push jobs for people with disabilities, and that has to change. The second policy is state aid, again, regulated at EU level, but the EU regulations allow member states, allow public authorities to really cover the costs of subsidies for reasonable accommodation, cover the costs of training of staff, cover the costs of maybe loss of productivity that may occur. These instruments work. They're active in most countries, but not sufficiently. What can we do to make sure they can work better? And the last point has been discussed, the European Social Fund, for example. Again, amazing instrument to really promote employment. Are we really using it to maximize its potential? I think we should think about that. The Recovery and Resilience Facility, again, another great instrument. I know that the French have, they're using the Recovery and Resilience Facility to create a support to support the employment of persons with disabilities by subsidizing the employers. Again, congratulations, France, and hopefully other countries are going to do the same. So the EU also has many great policies that can really help create more inclusive labour markets. Now it's up to us to make the most of it. Thank you.
Merci. Merci beaucoup à tous. Bravo, vous avez tous tenu vos timings.
Thank you all, and well done. You all kept to the time allotted to you, and I suggest you go back to your seats. I thank you all very much, and thank you for the substance that you have presented. We are going to change a few seats, if you don't mind, because for the next session, we have representatives from 9 different countries, plus a testimonial. So back in a minute. So, end of the staging time. So I'm going to ask you to sit on your chairs based on your call. First of all, Anne Habit from Ireland, where she's Minister in charge of Disability. Then we have Rolf Schmartenberg. I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name, sir. You're State Secretary to the Federal Minister for Labor and Social Affairs in Germany. Mrs. Sophie Klusell, State Secretary for Persons with Disabilities in France. Martina Stepankova, Deputy Minister of Labor and Social Affairs in Czech Republic. For Belgium, I should be able to pronounce that. Karine Lalieu, Minister for Pensions and Social Integration. For Luxembourg, Georges Angel, Minister of Employment and Work and Social and Solidarity Economy. Then Elina Selmina, Deputy State Secretary, Ministry of Welfare in Latvia. And then we have Wolfgang Muckstein, who is Federal Minister of Social Affairs, Healthcare and Consumer Protection in Austria. And for Romania, Adela Crăciun, Vice President of the National Authority for the Right of the People with Disabilities, and our testimonial will be presented by Mr. Louis Gustin, Policy Officer for People with Disabilities at the Human Resources Department of the Social Ministry in France. We have a lot to tell each other about employment. Maybe we should start with the main barriers to overcome to reinforce the real integration of people with disability in their employment. Ireland, maybe first.
Very much. There are many challenges, no doubt, but common and unique faced by member states is successfully integrating people with disability into the labour market. And in Ireland, we're working hard to ensure that our mainstream services are joined so there's no wrong door for people with disabilities to enter when they need support. We refer to this as the whole issue of transitioning from education, as I spoke about earlier, and transitioning into the labour force and to be supported and to be integrated. And I think that's what was in the previous session, was actually about ensuring that there is that proper integration, proper support, that when people enter the labour market, it can be very successful. A particular challenge in Ireland is in ensuring that people remain supported when making that transition across state services and supports across life stages. And that's a particular focus that we have with the comprehensive employment strategy. And we have a comprehensive employment strategy in its third iteration. This time it's working from 2022 to 2024.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. How do things happen in Germany? What are the main problems that you have to overcome? Well, thank you very much, Sophie. I would like to speak German if you don't mind. I believe it's possible. Do I have to stop for a minute so that you all seize your headsets? Thank you very much for organizing this conference. Let me start by a general observation. So, as I was saying, I'd like to start with a general observation, and then I'd like to mention two examples of what's done in Germany. The general observation is the fact that is linked to the war, with this war, because this war is really an attack on the European model, on our inclusive democracy. And in our inclusive democracy, we feel that citizens work and therefore take part in and contribute to society. This is a central element in our society. But there is a dark aspect to this. And I'm thinking about the speech on meritocracy, the idea that everyone is responsible for their own happiness as a person. We have seen, if you look at income distribution, that this is working less and less. Therefore, the topic we're mentioning today has important basic aspects. In our world, where we want to employ people with disabilities, there's lots of different forms of work. There are protected jobs that are not part of the market economy concept. And often these jobs are not properly respected. And we've seen that in Germany, and this is something we must work on. So this was my general observation. Now, let me give you two practical elements. We want to promote the employment of people with disabilities. And in order to do this, we have a compensation system. A quarter of companies that are supposed to compulsorily employ people with disabilities do not do so. So we have increased the compensation tax. We are going to, we discussed this for many years, but we're implementing it now. We are going to have people throughout the country informing employers to how to employ people with disabilities. So we're going to not only ask them for tax, but we're going to give them support. Thank you very much. And sorry I had to speak German, says the speaker. Thank you very much. No problem. Sophie Klusell for France. We will exchange on best practices, but which are the main obstacles that have to be overcome to make integration real? Well, in France, the obligation is 6%, whatever the company, whether private or public. And this is true since 1987. And today, the figure is 3.8% in the private companies and 6.5% in the public services. So as you can see, this quota is progressing very slowly. I'm not going to wait another 30 years for it to progress. Our policy is based on the fact that we feel we have this obligation which is not being complied with. So we felt it was better, rather than forcing companies to do so, to give them a desire to do so. So what did we do to overcome the main obstacles? We freed the speech. We have a quota policy, but the person is free to declare their disability or not. So freeing the speech is important. It's important to tell them, never mind if you declare that you have a disability, we'll make sure that you have possibility to work. We want to get rid of prejudice. It's very complicated because we all know that 80% of disabilities are invisible. And the idea is to create a state of trust. And we have the same problem as you do in Germany. We have 127 people in protected workshops. We have 35,000 people who work with subsidies. So we have to be able to shift from one place to another, which was not the truth previously, because when you were working in a protected workshop, we were not corresponding to the mainline labor law. So the first cause of discrimination is access of people with disabilities to employment. Then we launched last November a major campaign to show people that there are competencies around us in this population. And we have a major tax. It's politically correct. It's called contribution of companies, but it's something that companies can do away with if they hire people with disabilities. We have a major fund that enables us to support companies to adapt and to give a better system for professional insertion. Then we have to work on maintaining people in their job. Thank you very much. Let's go to the Czech Republic with Mrs. Stepankova. Same question as I asked your colleagues. And what are the obstacles and what is the state of the art in Czech Republic?
Thank you very much. Dear ministers, dear colleagues, the panel is about employment, but before I start, let me talk a little bit also about tragedy of Ukrainian refugees. It was mentioned by a Polish colleague in the morning, and I was here on Friday in Paris to discuss the poverty of children. And it was mentioned many times that in armed conflict, children are one of the most vulnerable groups. And I have to say that also, and it was discussed during the panel and also outside in the halls, that also people with disabilities are one of the most vulnerable groups. And we have to take into account and think about it and cooperate together among member states to accommodate the needs of those people coming to the European Union, and also as in the way as much as it's possible in Ukraine. Since in the Czech Republic we have almost 150,000 people up to date fleeing the Ukraine. So just allow me to start with this. And now back to our topic. Maybe I'd like to start a little bit with the statistic, which is not very optimistic in the Czech Republic. We register about 460,000 of persons with disabilities, and about only 19% are employed on the open labor market. About 15% are in sheltered employment, and about 57% people with disabilities are inactive, and 8% are unemployed. So you can see that the negative numbers are quite high, and it shows that people with disabilities face quite a lot of barriers. Maybe one of them is stereotypes, maybe the biggest one. And what I found really inspiring today during the discussion was let's talk rather about abilities than disabilities, because maybe if employers will hear more about abilities, what are the abilities of people with how they can work, how they can help, what they can do, what are their skills, what is their education, maybe it will help to fight the stereotypes that we can consider as one of the big barriers. So maybe this is my contribution for now, and I will, because I assume we will talk later more about concrete examples.
Absolument, vous aurez bien évidemment.
That's right, and we'll be returning to you later on to provide extra comments. Thank you very much. Let's turn to Belgium. I don't have your name, Mr. Kashoff. I didn't have it previously. You are a Belgian ambassador, so where do things stand job-wise in our neighbouring country, Belgium? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Sophie, I am responsible. Karine, my minister, couldn't be with us. She asked me to provide her contribution that she wished to make in this forum. But before doing that, I'd like to join in my Czech colleagues' comments to muster all our efforts to support the handicapped in Ukraine who are fleeing that country. We can only imagine how disastrous their circumstances must be to leave job, home, where even knowing that in normal circumstances their situation is difficult. I'd like to thank the French presidency for organizing this event on the implementation of the European strategy to support the rights of the handicapped. This strategy is a very important tool to reinforce inclusion of the disabled right across every sphere of life: private life, professional life, and public life. One of the things that is at issue here in this inclusion is employment for the disabled. As the United Nations Convention provides, the work of the disabled must be made available. Of course, challenges are big. In 2018 in Belgium, the rate of employment among the disabled among the 20-64 age bracket was only 31.6%. This is why we really need to be bold and be assertive to dip into this talent pool among the disabled. This will be of benefit to the individuals themselves, to the economy more broadly, and to social inclusion. It's obvious that the Belgian, therefore, supports initiatives provided for in the European plan and the measures put forward this year by the Commission to ameliorate the prospects of the disabled in the labour market. And this is part and parcel of our desire to support the social pillars of Europe and reinforce coordination within this 6-month period. We'll be lending a ready eye to the integration of disabled initiatives in all European measures, in particular in terms of the inclusive recovery and social partners' involvement and trade union or representative bodies of the disabled. Of course, their inclusion is very important. Now, let me just share 4 points where the Belgian government is involved and wish to increase its involvement over and beyond the work provided to have a decent livelihood. A disabled person needs to be able to have a fulfilled existence, but the disabled today still grapple with lots of things that stop them contributing equally on the labour market. With an equal salary, you should have equal status, but this is not necessarily what we see. We also need to think about a perfect injustice, or totally incoherent, if not a perfect injustice, when people are working. And this is really why the minister drastically reduced what's called in Belgium the cost of work. Henceforth, the Belgian population afflicted by a disability will no longer see their allowances reduced or removed because they've chosen to work. The integration allowance means that they can offset the dip in revenue due to their inability. Handicap should be seen as a value added, and this is why we're working on capitalising upon that. The minister is very active in reforming the computation of allowances to prompt jobs and avoid barriers to entry on the labour market. With her colleague, the Minister of Employment, are working on positive levers to pull in order to avoid and eliminate social exclusion of risk populations, including the disabled. Second point, over and beyond the allowances, is the fact that it's crucial to promote a labour environment which is inclusive. The rights of the disabled need to be effective in practice, and in particular, an interdiction to any discriminatory practice, the obligation to provide reasonable accommodation, and obviously offering well-being in the workplace. The European plan needs to make sure that there's a better implementation of directives on job equality. There are interesting avenues to explore in the report produced by the Commission in 2021. In Belgium, the Minister is working with all stakeholders to reinforce outreach and draw people's eyes to the needs of the disabled provided for under the rule. My third point, in order to improve employment among the disabled, we need to show the way forward. This is why public authorities need to be exemplars in employing the disabled. In Belgium, we have new measures to bring to 3% the employment rate of the disabled in federal administrations. This may mean small beer, but you need to remember that the challenge is huge and requires an integrated approach, but also an assertive approach that the minister wishes to undertake and have everybody within the government undertake, including those responsible for the administration. Last point, it's important to favour independent entrepreneurial work. The ability to become an entrepreneur should be made easier for the disabled. And this thanks to making it easier financially to enjoy an independent status. Information dissemination or better support for the disabled in company creation. So these are the measures that we're signing up to, and we'll be doing so over the next few years. And it's thanks to the first federal plan and action plan for the disabled in Belgium, and the minister legitimately wanted to point out that in March last, the Belgian government built into its constitution. I heard a member of the commission saying very rightly that what is written in the bitter letter of the law, Article 20.3 in the Constitution is taking into consideration all those who are disabled. They are fully entitled to total inclusion in society as a whole, including reasonable accommodation. So this constitutional anchorage will provide a specific avenue of improvement for the disabled. It's a constitutional entitlement now. So we're readying the way to make sure that Parliament implements and guarantees properly the legal entitlements of the disabled. In other words, you cannot refuse reasonable accommodation, and you cannot stop the disabled becoming fully fledged members of society to avoid these people suffering from exclusion. And my last sentence will go to women, because it was yesterday that we celebrated the International Women's Day. There are also women who are disabled, part of that population, and therefore see a twofold problem of visibility. Thanks very much. Okay, let's go over to Latvia now with Elena to see where things stand in that country, job-wise.
Yes, thank you very much. And distinguished guests, I would like to join the concerns expressed by the previous speakers as regards the situation in Ukraine, and say that we need to pay particular attention, and we are worried about people with disabilities in Ukraine. And there are across our countries NGOs that are trying to provide and get in and supply with the necessary things that are vital at the moment. But the other thing is that in recent days, we can also observe a weird trend in social platforms that the sanctions should be eased because they are hitting too harsh the ordinary people in Russia, and it pays an inflation cost to us. And at this moment, I think we must be aware that it has a human toll, and it must be borne not only by people in Ukraine, but also by every one of us in our countries. We cannot think that they will carry the burden on their own, and we will just continue living in our wealthy apartments and providing some donations. But then if I turn to disability issue more concretely in Latvia, just the picture, we are a country of roughly 2 million people. We have 200,000 people with disabilities, which is approximately 10% of inhabitants. The share of 40% of them do work. It does increase with every year. It didn't decrease over last 10 years in none of the years, just slightly during the COVID year. So it is a good sign that it goes up with every year, but we would wish to see it go up more quickly. Of course, the poverty rate of people with disabilities is of big concern as well. And that's why the inclusion into the labor market becomes even more important. You cannot rely that your life will be sufficiently provided if you only rely on benefits and social assistance, and you will not fulfill your aims and self-esteem if you do not. It's something that you get if you fulfill your talents in the labor market. But in our country, I would say that our biggest challenges are at the moment the most priorities would be the quality of jobs, strengthening the employment and integration services that is currently carried out together with NGOs, inviting them to participate in the design of the services that are provided by the national PES. And also the accessibility directive has been a big driver internally. Some institutions that have never before thought about disability issues correspondingly to their topic, be it financial associations or travel agencies, now sit at the same table and think how they're gonna make their e-services or goods accessible to people with disabilities. And I would say that mutual exchange and learning is the thing that works. We all know what must be achieved, but the most difficult question is how. And sometimes the bicycle is already invented in your neighboring country, and you just need to ask. If you have a challenge and they have dealt with it, you can really exchange the good things. But not to be only skeptical about yourself, I think we also need, and it was mentioned in the first discussion in the morning, you need to have a clear monitoring mechanism to measure yourself. Where do you stand today in comparison to 5 or 10 years back? Because otherwise we tend to stick into the negative narrative that it's all bad. We have achieved a lot of during last 10 years. And if you don't recognize the good things that have been achieved, then you lose the spirit to move forward. So there are challenges, you must recognize them, but you must also be honest about the things we have achieved over previous years as well. But to do that, you need to know what things are going to be measured and what are the actions you are going to make in next coming years. And currently, of course, the national policy in Latvia goes in line with the 7-year planning period with the structural funds, and there are national policy guidelines adopted at the end of last year, and there is a specific plan for disability adopted by the Cabinet of Ministers as well, which lines out different activities and priority fields. But as you might know, the devil is always in the details. So it depends what kind of measures are you going to support through both the RRF and also the social fund. And there is a very big support to provide support for people with disabilities from the ESF side, and we will use the RRF funds to support the built environment both for public institutions where people do come and receive services, and also support several hundreds of people to accommodate their housing, to make the housing accessible. Of course, it's not enough, and that's why we will need a criteria how to pick out of those probably couple of thousand people, those who will get the support, but it will show the way forward that those people who have had the service can now freely join and be independent and move around and participate in the labor market as they wish. I think I stop here, and very many things have already been said. But the one last thing is that people, I was listening very carefully during the lunch to the discussion on autism, and that children do not need disability to be recognized as having disability just because to receive the services. In our country, children can be recognized with disability, with heavy autism, but the parents say we need services and support, not the disability status and benefits. And the same goes for other people with disabilities. If you would provide them with the full scope of necessary services, then probably they would not go to the Disability Commission and claim the disability status. Yeah, thank you.
Merci, merci beaucoup à vous.
Thank you very much. Perhaps now we move off to Luxembourg. We've switched around speakers, so I wasn't aware of that. It's Mr. Tremon who's responsible for this area who'll be speaking to us now. Where do things stand for the disabled employment-wise in Luxembourg? Hello, yes. I'm representing the Labour Minister in Luxembourg, who was scheduled to appear, but unfortunately was detained in Luxembourg because of the certain political circumstances. My thanks go to the French presidency for having organised this very important event on a very important topic, which is dear to my heart. I think everything that we've already covered today has proved very valuable. All right then, how do things stand in Luxembourg? Well, I suppose at first blush, Luxembourg has a legal environment which seems very comprehensive. Thinking about professional insertion for disabled, there is financial support, quite considerable, generous financial support in terms of reasonable accommodation. There's also participation or contribution for salaries for disabled who are employed by companies. This can go up to 100% payment. There's assistance for inclusion. There's a quota system. 5% for public service, for example. And then if you just look at the law, the legal text, probably similar to other countries, in Luxembourg, we compare the figures, and what we see is that out of 16,000 job seekers, Luxembourg, of course, is a very small country, so don't be struck by how small the figures may be for you. So 16,000 job seekers. The job office has recorded 4,000 who've got either are being reclassed as handicapped or already handicapped officially. So as a proportion of job seekers totally, we can see, thanks to these figures, that despite financing, generous financing, and the legal environment, there's still a problem with recruiting the handicapped on the labour market. So, if I were just to home in on one or two challenges, the one would be quite obviously that of education and training. We talked about this at length this morning. I don't want to return to that in any great detail, but it's it's absolutely clear, but for the labour market as it stands today, more than ever, I would say, qualifications are crucial, skills. This is true for employees without a handicap, and of course more so for the disabled. Bearing in mind particularly, and we've heard this a number of times this morning, bearing in mind that success at school isn't on a par with the more mainstream members of the population, so they have to make extra strides when you're disabled in terms of school performance, and also continuous and professional training. The figures were aired this morning, as was said by the Commission. There's much less effort for vocational training for the disabled as opposed to to non-handicapped people. Now let's talk about employers. We need to talk about employers. We need to do outreach with them. They need to receive better and more information. We need to break up stereotypes. I think a number of employers haven't possibly thought very much about what a disabled person may provide by way of contribution. Talk about disability rather than ability. So I think we need to switch people's view, and we need to bring into stark relief their value added. The value added that can be provided by a disabled person to an employer, rather than dwelling on disability or incapacity. I think we also ought to talk about quotas. So yes, informing, raising awareness, but also create accountability and analyze, and to gauge whether the results are where they should be. And then another point, of course, is that of creating bridges between a protected market to an initial steps in an unsheltered market. In Luxembourg, we have protected workshops. That system is pretty well rolled out. It's generously financed and funded. But of course, the risk is that you're locked into that protected environment. You're just going to stay there. And the shame is not to try and offer a gateway for these people into an initial steps into an unsheltered labour market. And perhaps we can talk about this afterwards, I don't know, but we're currently developing ideas, putting together tools to make sure to facilitate that transition from protected to an open market. There you go. I think I'll probably stop there. Thanks very much. Thank you. We're going off to Austria now. Not with the initial gentleman that was announced, but with you, Sabine. I haven't been given your job title, so perhaps you can introduce yourself. Do forgive me. And then you can tell me where things stand, job-wise, in Austria. Thank you. Our new Federal Minister for Social Affairs, Health and Protection of the Consumer only joined office yesterday. And there you have it. So I'll be speaking in German, with your leave. But I'd like to thank the French presidency for having organised this conference today and its own presidency. So what's our objective? Sustainable inclusion. There was the pandemic. During the pandemic, the disabled were hit more heavily than any other people. And the labour market in Austria has become more difficult. But we need to measure and gauge their professional situation. At the end of February 2022, there was unemployment. General unemployment was cut a third compared with the previous year. People who were disabled or are disabled, the unemployment rate only dipped a fifth compared with the previous year. 17.7%. We had 17.7% less unemployed than the previous year. So for a proper labour market, you need to take measures swiftly. Now, Austria operates very well in terms of allowances provided for the disabled and providing support to companies. There is contributions made to disabled salaries, contributions also for adapting workstations. Now, Austria has set in motion measures to help a young disabled, helping them to transition from a school environment to move on to the labour market and to help them through their first years as an employee, and also to help them iron out any friction in the workplace. Lots of coaching, assistance to that end.
Jedoch diese Angebote
In the face of the COVID-19 pandemic, there is a need to further improve those measures. We need more such measures. We need to expand the existing ones. This is why this year we have further increased resources dedicated to such programs. In 2022, as much as 265 million euros will be earmarked, will be allocated to supporting individual and collective projects. This money will also go to businesses. By and large, this is a 10% increase in expenditure, so we're talking about 28 million euros. We also provide support to specific key populations such as female PWDs. So women with disabilities, we support measures to help individuals with mental health disabilities, mental health disorders. Work processes may have to be redesigned in the face of the pandemic, but if we do that, if we redesign those work processes, those labor processes, then it'll be an opportunity to better mainstream PWDs. This is something that has been said before. Other speakers have referenced that possibility. And businesses need assistance. They need support. And this is why we're sending advisors to those businesses. Now, Austria has taken specific measures and successfully reduced the negative impacts of the crisis on persons with disabilities, and we will continue those measures. And I'm very happy that the European Commission has unveiled a package to improve work and labor opportunities for persons with disabilities. This is clearly a flagship initiative for 2022, which will enable member states to receive support so they can implement those guidelines. Austria will take an active part in those programs and is looking forward to sharing its experience with other member states. Austria would like to congratulate the European Commission on its strategy on the rights of PWDs. The European Commission has developed a very good strategy, which is in line with the UN Convention. Like other member states, Austria has been able to take an active part in developing said strategy. Now, in the future, cooperation will increase further between the European Commission and the EU's member state. This strategy is a good foundation for new member states to take further measures to promote the rights of PWDs. And this is in line with the need to implement the UN Convention at country level and do this via action plans to promote the rights of PWDs by 2030. Now, this national action plan will soon be approved. It contains a raft of measures and targets in every area of life, particularly employment. Employment in connection with PWDs. There's a specific section on employment of PWDs, and every region, every land is involved. Now, disability mainstreaming is a key principle which is being taken very seriously by the Labour and Social Affairs Minister, and is particularly important in times of crisis, because specific measures need to be taken to promote the rights of PWDs. And refugees as well. Refugees need additional support. And this is why we need to lay the groundwork for such measures, and the Austrian Ministry for Social Affairs is already tackling the issue. Let's start the roundtable with a Romanian representative. So what's the work situation? What are the obstacles and what are the solutions in your country? Well, we'll get back to the solutions in a very hands-on fashion later after we heard from everybody.
Participants, thank you for the invitation and all the precious information we have received today. Romania has a strategy for the persons with disabilities, A Fair Romania, fully aligned with the European strategy for persons with disability. The strategy is for now a draft, but it's soon to be approved until the end of March. One of the main focus points on our strategy is employment. According to our statistics, Romania still has a low rate of employment for persons with disabilities. The main problem is that employers fail to see the ability in the persons with disability. Also, we have another important factor. We talk about the employer and the person with disabilities, but we never talk about the colleagues. In Romania, we have a problem with colleagues who sometimes have difficulties working with the person with disability. And even if the employer is open to work with persons with disabilities, we cannot create a good inclusion process because of the colleagues who are not able to work with the persons with disabilities. Also, we have seen, and practice has shown us, that persons with disabilities have a problem with work routine. Sometimes they don't understand that if they get a job, they have to get up every day from Monday to Friday and go to work. And we have to train and teach them this process, a process that seems very normal to us, but we have to teach this process to them. Another important aspect is that we cannot talk about employment if we do not talk about accessibility. That is why our strategy has developed an accessibility compendium that brings together the minimum set of specific requirements needed to ensure physical communication and information accessibility. I feel we have a long way to go, but we have come a long way already. And we are determined, using the general framework proposed by the European strategy, customizing with the directions of actions and measures provided for the national strategy in the field, through institutional collaboration with projects with the European funding, but also through the constant communication and collaboration with the non-governmental organizations, we will increase the employment of people with disabilities and implicitly the social inclusion of them. Thank you very much.
Merci à vous.
Thank you so much for that concise overview. Now, the idea, obviously, once you've taken stock of the situation, is to try and improve it. So, Second round of questions. How about best practice? How about sharing best practice? That are maybe different assistance methods or initiatives that your respective countries have taken that you could share. Let's start with Ireland once again. So hands-on things that you'd like to share with us.
Thank you very much. Absolutely. I suppose really the most important thing is to have a good foundation. And that's where our comprehensive employment strategy, as I said, we're in our third iteration. So when COVID came, our ethos within the Department of Health, the Department of Equality led by the Taoiseach was, we would build back better. That was our lesson that we took from COVID, build back better. And when you talk about building back better, we looked at a number of areas, just building on what my colleague here from Romania is after saying. You have to look at the individual, you have to look at the employer, you have to look at the awareness piece of it and the supports that are required. And within that, then I'll tell you what we did. So the first step was, in relation to school leavers, we have a very comprehensive school leavers programme in Ireland, but we always just had the same path. You did your school leavers and you went to day services. Last year, last September, I announced the opportunity for school leavers to take a 3-year gap, to go into education, to go into training, to go into further ed, where they could learn the abilities to actually independently work, depending on the person's need. The second thing was we did an employers awareness campaign, and that employers awareness campaign was to show employers how they could engage in having a person with a disability participate in the workplace. So it's called Employers for Change, and we needed to create disability confidence. The third thing that we did, and it was Towards Work project, which really was about the adaptation under the Social Protection Fund, what was available to support the employers. And finally, last June, the Taoiseach announced Pathways to Work. And the whole idea about the Pathways to Work was to actually dot it all together. So you would have a cross-departmental working together. So it didn't fall in one office. We had a number of cross-governments working together. And this year I look forward to completing the design of a job coaching scheme for people. So people with complex disability needs, that we were able to incorporate them within the workforce, regardless of their ability, but harnessing their real ability of participation, equality, and inclusion. And that has to be the core centre of the UNCRPD, where it's all about the person, and the person is at the centre, and bringing people with us. And I'm going to finish on this. I think, Madam, it was remiss of me not to acknowledge the status of what's going on in the Ukraine. I know all my colleagues have done. And for 30 seconds, I'll take this opportunity. Earlier on today, we spoke about people with disabilities. My colleague in Poland spoke in relation to 100,000 with disabilities exiting the horrendous situation in the Ukraine. I think about the people who aren't exiting with disabilities. I'm concerned about them. They will never make it to a photograph. They will never be on the front of any paper because they have not the ability to leave. It is incumbent on us, all of us in Europe, to ensure that the humanitarian corridors work. We need to ensure that the medicines and the oxygen gets in, and we need to ensure that the supports for the people to exit are there. They're given the opportunity, we will all play our part to support. But it's the person that can't we must think of today. Thank you very much, Chair.
Merci. Pour rester sur cette...
More about employment, more about best practice that was recently implemented. What about Germany? Has the health crisis been an opportunity to set up specific measures? What's new in Germany, with or without COVID? What's new? Yes. Well, Obviously, because of COVID-19, because of the health crisis, we have implemented new measures. In particular, we have enacted new legislation. And under such legislation, any social policy will be funded. Will be funded even if the actual outcome doesn't meet the target set initially. But of course, we need to take into account the excellent work done by non-governmental organizations. Policymakers, decision makers need to see those NGOs as an important infrastructure, particularly in times of crisis, and they need to be maintained. This infrastructure needs to be maintained. And this is why I'm hoping that this legislation will be enshrined in our social code. This is a key takeaway from the COVID-19 crisis. And obviously, there have been so many opportunities that have cropped up thanks to technology, video conferencing, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, you name it. ICTs, information and communication technologies, have made it possible for persons with disabilities to truly participate. Because all of a sudden, there was no longer a need to travel or to go cross country to take part in a workshop. In Berlin, for example, you can stay in Freiburg, you can stay home and meet virtually. Now, in terms of best practice, there is something that I would like to emphasize. 40,000 businesses. There are 40,000 businesses that do not employ any persons with disabilities, but they really should. Now, if we manage to turn them around, then I think it'll be a great inroad, a great step forward. So how do we reach out to them? How do we get the message across? And on this note, I do think that our Romanian counterpart said something really interesting. How do you approach employers as well as employees? Well, there is one best practice. In Germany, we have a forum for inclusive businesses. And these are businesses that receive awards for best practice. And this forum, this award ceremony is an opportunity to showcase the best performing businesses on the inclusion front. And I think that from a communications perspective, this is a very interesting approach. This is an approach that other companies are trying to embrace because they're seeing other people do it and being rewarded for it. Businesses that have never embarked on this adventure, never started on that path, they need help, they need guidance, they need assistance. They need examples, they need role models. Companies, obviously, businesses need skilled employees. They need people who will get the job done. And you have to say that the workforce in Germany is extremely skilled, extremely qualified. But I do think that through subsidies and through support measures, we will succeed in achieving this objective. Thank you very much for sharing that best practice. So soft power in addition to hard power. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. But what about best practice? Best practice that could actually be duplicated in other countries? Yes, absolutely. Well, there's good news that I'd like to share with you. Over the past 5 years, the unemployment rate has dropped by 5 points for PWDs. And during the COVID crisis, PWDs did not serve as an adjustment variable because we got major companies to sign an inclusion manifesto, and they undertook to achieve 10 key objectives, including apprenticeship. We haven't talked about apprenticeship, but it's a major mainstreaming tool. And during the crisis, we set up subsidies for direct employment for PWDs. So in France, you got to understand there are open-ended contracts and term contracts. And for any contract signed, we subsidized wages. So we signed over 30,000 contracts, including 80% open-ended contracts in SMEs. So this wasn't just greenwashing or inclusion washing for major corporates. Now, trade unions are also involved because social dialogue is an opportunity to improve and promote the rights of PWDs. And every agency, every organization in civil society and in the labor universe need to be on board, including trade unions. Now, PWDs, young and old, can use apprenticeship as an opportunity to retrain. Say something happens in life and they can no longer do their jobs. They may not have the expertise needed for another job, so they need to train, retrain, find another job, rebuild their lives. We will burn up the furniture. We are using every means available to us. And then we had a campaign. I'm talking to the lady from Ireland. You staged that campaign in your own country, but why not initiate a major European-wide campaign that would target employers, whether public or private sector, to showcase the talents and the skills and the abilities of PWDs on the jobs market? There's a shortage of skills and workforce across Europe. COVID has struck, yes, and now the war in Ukraine, yes, but the recovery is something that could bring everybody together, every EU national. We can all speak with the same voice and discuss the abilities and the skills of PWDs whose disabilities should not be our focus. We need to focus on the special abilities that they have, and there's a pool of talent that wants a single thing: to emancipate themselves and break free through work. Now, I am aware of the long-standing structures, whether in your country and ours. We developed schemes, platforms to support employers with different types of disabilities. So for years, in France, PWD employment was a matter for specialists. No more. Earlier, someone explained that we are trying to streamline matters for young PWDs in particular who need support throughout their schooling. Now, recognition of their status is key to providing adaptations, accommodations, and this is how these people are no longer lost to follow-up. We need to improve employability of PWDs. And also whatever's out there and whatever works, we need to talk about it. We need to advertise it. So we're working with a lot of employers who've been really active throughout the crisis. So we have a barometer with 5 different criteria that the different businesses worked on. For example, direct employment, apprenticeship, the number of training courses, so that people who come and knock on a business's door will know exactly where the employer is standing in terms of inclusive employment policies. And the last thing that is so dear to my heart ever since I took office 5 years ago, the Duo Day. Duo Day is an Irish initiative, isn't it? So let's turn that into an EU-wide driver. And also, we have a special week for PWD employment. It is the 3rd week of November. We need to intensify that movement. Duo Day should be a major driver for bringing people together. We need to push those doors open, drive this together. Last year, in November, 30,000 duets were set up. So this is a pool for inclusive sourcing. I don't know any employer who's actually a bad guy. They just don't have the tools or the knowledge. They just don't know. So Duo Day, job coaching initiatives, major campaigns are promoting sheltered and assisted and aided jobs. I think these are tools that we can use as part of the European strategy for that'll take us until 2030. And also the employment package. So we have very hands-on and innovative solutions. What a beautiful program indeed. A beautiful program for all EU member states. What about the Czech Republic? So what have you done lately in terms of initiatives? Or maybe you'd like to simply respond to what your counterparts have just said.
Thank you very much. In the Czech Republic, I'm lucky to say that the COVID crisis didn't have really bad impact on the labor market. It didn't increase the unemployment, and so because the government set up the programs supporting jobs and companies. So, but there've been a lot of discussion lately in the area of labor market about the change of labor market, how the labor market will be influenced by the robotization and digitalization, and how it is needed to think about upskilling and reskilling and of people, and we cannot forget about people with disabilities in those discussions, because it will definitely influence also them too. So on the other hand, as it was mentioned, digitalization can be really useful. The possibility to work online in distance, use computers, can be really helpful. So we have to think about it. In the Czech Republic, probably as in the many countries, we have a protected market and of course open labor market, where also people with disabilities are employed. Regarding protected labor market, it is supported mainly through wage subsidies, work assistance, transportation subsidies, contributions to adapt workplaces, and also important part is or are social enterprises. In the Czech Republic, social enterprises are also supported by ESF fund, which plays also important role in other areas of employment of people with disabilities. And for me personal, or our ministry, we see in social entrepreneurship really the future to employ people with disadvantages, not only people with disabilities, but for example with social disadvantages. But I have to admit that in the Czech Republic, this area hasn't been developed quite enough yet. So this is something what's ahead us, and one of the priorities, or one of the Czech current government, is the law on social enterprises, and the law that should set up the support and create the environment when this sector could develop more efficiently. Also, people with disabilities are supported on the open labor market. In the Czech Republic, each employer that employs 25 people has the obligation to employ at least 4% of persons with disabilities, or this obligation can be replaced by buying goods and services from the sheltered or protected labor market, or by paying a penalty. Of course, as in Germany, in the Czech Republic, we have also many companies who prefer those possibilities rather than employing people with disabilities. And maybe to tell you one concrete, really concrete example that was also developed through support by ESF funds. In the Czech Republic, within the Public Employment Service, we have established a network of 99 coordinators. Those coordinators deal specifically with persons with disabilities, so they are specialized in that topic, and they provide comprehensive guidance and counseling to job seekers with disabilities, also promote cooperation with the employers, social services, diagnostic centers, NGOs, social partners, and other stakeholders. And their aim is to ensure a permeable system of social and work rehabilitation. This has improved the capacity and quality of employment services for people with disabilities, and we can already see really positive results, concrete numbers. For example, in July 2017, there were like 49 job seekers with disabilities, and in January 22, only 38,000. So this is one concrete example how the establishment of this network really in the public, within the public employment services, really helped people with disabilities in concrete situations.
Merci.
Thank you very much. So we talked about job coaching. We talked about the Irish initiative called Do a Day. We talked about other efforts as well that can be mainstreamed In Belgium, I'm turning to François de Kerchef d'Exaerde. Are there initiatives, are there measures that have already been set up, or what are your plans? Thank you. Thank you for your question. There are two measures that I'd like to review. I only got a chance to touch upon them briefly when I spoke earlier. So the first, it's a very hands-on measure, actually, and a recent one. Measure number one, in line with what Minister Karine Lallieu said about the need to remove traps. The discount on the discount that we talked about should be increased, and this should also come with an increase in the cap on substitution wages, and this will improve the situation of 41,000 people. What is the mechanism? Because I'm not sure I understand. I don't think everybody understands. Not everybody knows the ins and outs of Belgian legislation. Could you please simply explain what this is all about?
De punir les personnes.
It would be unfair to punish the people who earn more by reducing their integration allocation, so because their disability does not disappear. So the cap is increased, okay. And what we should mention is that the 2022 budget of the federal government has increased the budget by has planned on 20 million euros for these people. So this will be retroactive to 2021. Second initiative I wanted to mention, which is not as recent, but which is not that old because it's a royal decree from February 2019. It sets the conditions of what we call positive action. It means that we can have a positive action when this represents an appropriate mean to eliminate social exclusion for some groups on the employment market, on the labor market. This applies in the private sector. And how can we define a positive action? It can be seen as a series of measures or actions to prevent or compensate for some disadvantages such as age, gender, etc., in order to reach equality between the groups that are at risk and the other groups. For example, the organization of recruitment campaigns for specific groups that are at risk, or the promotion of jobs for candidates for a target group, etc. And these are the two examples I wanted to mention. Thank you very much. Let's go to Latvia and try to share practical examples with you, Elina Selmina.
Thank you very much. We will certainly continue. It's weird hearing your own voice. Yeah, we will certainly continue with the awareness campaigns. We had a large one last year and it never ends. You cannot stop one day and tell you did the campaign last month and now everyone knows everything. It's not the case. A dedicated website has been set up providing practical steps both for the job seekers and employers looking for employees. And it was accompanied and will be accompanied with public discussions and dissemination of good practice, showing both not only very specific people with high knowledge and highest education, but also simple professions, because there are people with disabilities with no higher education, but still looking for a job. And there are dedicated to have a job on their own as well. Then we have started the cooperation more tighter than before, I would say, with the Ministry of Education. They provide the special vocational education, but still we see that people, after they graduate those schools, do not enter the labor market, which means that they need a very clear career guidance while still in the school to support them. And there was a very good, actually not supported by the government, but very good initiative where vocational professional school pupils without disability within one of their projects decided to produce portfolios for youngsters with disabilities. Not a regular CV with my birth date and educational establishments, but with my strengths and weaknesses, likes and dislikes, what do I perform good, what is more difficult for me. And that gives the employer an impression what kind of job could this person do better than the other one. And they continue with these portfolios for the other pupils with disability as well. And then guidelines and seminars are continuously requested and needed for different auditories. They are requested on compensations and adaptations for the workplace. What are the support mechanisms to companies? They are for accessibility requirements. What do we need to do? What are the specificities of people with disabilities? How do we communicate with them? And the last thing I think I would mention is that there are several annual action plans or campaigns, or awards is the right word actually, yeah, for diversity policies. And they are not only targeted to people with disabilities, but they cover the whole range of diversity. And this somehow works better if you show that any kind of diversity brings benefits and better climate within the company. And that's how they take on board the disability issue as well. I think we move into good direction. However, I would like to finish by saying that probably, I'm sure some of you know the Amartya Sen and his capability theory as well, which tells us that not everyone will be able to perform the same results if you give the same instruments, which means that every one of us does have an internal strength and driving force, and very much depends on the social circumstances where you are. So if we want to have people with disabilities at 20 years of age with this good strength, inner strength and driving force within them, the support must be provided already long before they enter the labor market, starting from the primary school and environment there. Thank you.
Merci, merci beaucoup. On va aller au Luxembourg pour poursuivre.
Thank you very much. Let's go over to Luxembourg to continue with this exchange on best practices and recent initiatives that could be reproduced. Once again, I'll ask you to be brief. Well, thank you very much. We too introduced the Duo Day a few years ago. I believe it was 2018 or 2019. I agree that this initiative should be reproduced at the European scale, as it's a great program that enables us to increase the awareness of companies and to show to people what they can gain from the corporate world, but it can also show to companies what they can gain from workers with disabilities. Unfortunately, in 2019, the COVID crisis appeared, and the inclusion assistant system that we had thought of introducing did not give the results we were hoping for, but we are counting on it, and we feel that it will be one more element to help the insertion of workers with disabilities. But I can't tell you if our model of inclusion assistant works or not. It's too early. Another practical example, the public service employment labor market in Luxembourg has hired for their telephone exchange only workers with the status of workers with disabilities. It represents 550 employees that are part of the public service, and out of the 550 workers of this advice or counseling phone system, 120 of them are workers with disabilities. So why shouldn't private companies do the same? More recently, we asked a think tank working on social responsibility for companies to draft a guide for companies, including a self-assessment tool, so that they can check whether they are ready or not to welcome workers with disabilities, and if the accommodation can be introduced. So this is a self-assessment tool, as I said, which is mainly aimed at human resources directors in the companies. It's a project, in fact, that is funded by the European Social Fund. And it will be made available to Luxembourg employers very soon. Thank you very much. We'll turn to the ambassador from Austria. Can you share a few initiatives from your country that could help others and that our ministers could take from you? Well, if you don't mind, I'm going to speak German. In Austria, we focus on various groups, in particular women with disabilities, youngsters with disabilities. For the moment, the participation of women with disabilities in the labor market is very low. And for youngsters, the most important moment is the first integration into the labor market. So our priority is companies as employers of people with disabilities, because in this field we feel that you have to turn to companies and make them aware of things. Since 2021, there is a pilot project for companies called NIBA, and companies are informed about the sustainable employment of people with disabilities, and they are made aware of the support they can get. The approach is twofold. First of all, it's based on the qualification of people at stake, based on the needs of companies, and the other part is the awareness growing and of the companies. And this seems to us to be a factor of success for people. Well, yes, we heard earlier about the difficulties of convincing workers to turn towards their colleagues with disabilities. Are there maybe the due day could be a help to make all the publics aware of the problem? What can you tell us for Romania?
But again, the reality has shown us that the employers prefer to pay the penalties rather than employ persons with disabilities. So we teamed up with NGOs and DPOs, and they went to the financial managers of the huge employers companies and explained to them financially that it is more cost efficient to hire a person with disability rather than pay the penalty for not hiring the person with disability, because in first place they gain a person who works and they don't have to pay the penalty. We also have a European project where the person with disability registers at their local employment office. They go to a mediation plan. We find a job for them, and if we find a job and they get hired, they receive assistive technology for free. They receive a voucher and they can buy with the voucher the assistive technology. And this has helped a lot. For the persons who are not able to be employed, they still receive the voucher, but they have to go through a training process or a course that they need to finish. I think we are on a good way. I always say that. We have a long way, but we are going on the right way. Thank you very much.
Merci, merci beaucoup à vous.
Thank you very much. We're reaching the moment of the testimony. We have a little time if some of you wants to add anything, last best practice. And Sophie Klusell, did you want to add anything? No? Well, let's go over to the testimonial of Mr. Louis Gustin. I guess that these initiatives echo with you and you can react to them.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I speak before audiences and I speak at conferences on disability in France and Brussels. Since my accident in 2015, today I'm lucky to be invited, I have the honor also of being invited by Minister Sophie Klusell, Minister of State responsible for the disabled under the presidency of France as President of the European Council. Let me just detail my past, personal and professional. At the end of my presentation, I'd like to put forward an idea to try and reinforce still further integration of the disabled in our communities. Now, I am fundamentally a European. I was born in Metz, in France, in Robert Schumann's Lorraine area, and as a child, I was very much involved in this cooperation environment between Belgium, Luxembourg and Germany. I studied in Warsaw at the Collège d'Europe, and I did 3 internships in Brussels, or for Brussels rather, at the European Parliament. Now, I could even go so far as to say that I am a kind of a disabled European, as it were, because I was a young French student in the day, and I had a stroke in Warsaw, in the old quarter, and I was looked after by Polish hospitals, subsequently French hospitals after being repatriated. Now, my personal experience of a handicap began on 27th of February 2015 when I was 24. And when I woke up in that Warsaw Hospital. I didn't speak French, English, nor Polish. That at the time I was learning when in Poland. I was basically unable to walk. And in my heart of hearts, I said to myself, look, I'm going to have to be strong now to fight back from this stroke situation and walk properly. In other words, with a leg and an arm that no longer responded to direction from my brain. So I learned to write with my left hand. And before my stroke, I was right-handed, very much so. But my main problem was that I suffered from aphasia. Now, what is aphasia? Aphasia is a linguistic disorder involving the fact that you find it difficult to find your words, and it can even go to an extreme of not being able to express yourself at all. It comes from brain lesions, generally from cerebral vascular problems. So I had a re-education after my stroke, and I had speech therapy in Poland. Logopeda, as it's termed in Polish, logopede in Wallon, and logopedist in Swiss. So as you can see, that goes to show, doesn't it? I'm very much European. Now, after 7 years of fighting tooth and nail, now I can speak before you in French, but also in English. Now, the future belongs to the bold and those who persevere. I'm much better now, and I'm really wanting to work for the benefit of the handicapped. Now, my girlfriend is a doctor, and she is a former victim of a stroke. And so day in, day out, we fight to that end. Being resilient means that you can bounce back, that you can start afresh after suffering trauma. Now, about my professional pathway now, I learned about a competitive examination to become a manager in the French civil service in September 2019. After being successful in that competitive process, I took the training that I had to have in order to join my position. So since June 2021, I've been a French civil servant, and I'm responsible for handicap policy at the HR Directorate at the Social Ministries. I provide a contribution to integration and the professional pathways of the handicapped. I also created a newsletter called Handicapped, which is a monthly, and has been come out and appeared in November 2021, and it's for all my colleagues in the social ministries. Also work on partnership projects with Belgium and Geneva Canton, and it's my hope that other countries in future will also express an interest to be involved in those partnerships. More broadly, I'm part of a 7-member team who's responsible for the social ministry's handicap policy. On a regular basis, we meet up to address these matters and draft new projects. And I also follow a training course at a university, Paris Est Créteil. Social ministries have forged a partnership with that institution, and at the end, hopefully, I will have my university diploma as a focal point for the disabled. So, turning to my adaptation of the workplace, I went to a work doctor. This is a legal requirement when you're disabled. He sent me off to a professional ergonomist who said I should have 2 computer screens and a computer mouse for my left hand. Primarily, she told me that I had to have an office assistant to correct my letters, my notes, and also the newsletter. And I have that person with me even today. So we're a tandem, a dynamic duo. He understands me, really, because he understands that I've got a writing and an oral handicap. He helps me 15 hours a week, 3 times 5-hour chunks. It took me 6 months to adapt to my current work, but I still have to upskill, and I'm supported by my colleagues and my office assistant. And I feel very comfortable in this professional environment. It wasn't always the case in my professional career, as many disabled people will bear out. As they have had to grapple with very difficult, stressful circumstances, and even burnout. So in my private life, I've always wanted to fight for Europe, even after my stroke. And during my re-education therapy process, I saw my friends go off to Brussels, off to Berlin, Warsaw, off to Paris, Copenhagen, to Kiev. But I couldn't go anywhere. I was voiceless. In 2019, I did leave with my girlfriend in a van that we'd reconfigured to suit to tailor itself to my disability. We rushed around Europe to meet not-for-profits to do a benchmark process about care that had been given to stroke sufferers and suffering and aphasia. So I went to Portugal, Spain, Italy, Poland, Belgium, etc., etc. In 2022, we're also going to do this in Switzerland and France, around Lake Geneva, on a tricycle, going through Geneva University, Lausanne Hospital, and the UN in Geneva. Now, I would like young civil servants who are disabled, I'd like them to be able to go and meet their counterparts, their European counterparts, and a kind of a Erasmus-type program for maybe a period that would range from 1 to 6 months, let's say. That would help them see how public administrations operate in various member states. It would also help everybody to learn from each other, sharing professional experience, grassroots experience, and to forge potential future partnerships. I think we need to create contacts. I think we need to constitute networks with other European countries and muster all the interested parties. So, to round off, and not to leave it at that, I'd just like to be a European ambassador who would develop the drafting, the building, the devising of an Erasmus for the disabled as civil servants, and to constitute this network with other European countries, with Poland, Belgium, with the Collège d'Europe, with Switzerland, and other countries, of course. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much to you. Well done for everything that you've achieved. A fabulous account, which is full of energy and whets all our appetites to move forward. Thanks to one and all. Can I just ask, since Belgium is with us, Louis referred to Belgium. I don't know whether Belgium would agree to work on that partnership among civil servants, disabled civil servants. What does Belgium say? If the microphone works, yes, it does. Great. So first off, allow me to say, Madam Minister, how impressed I am by the account that we've just heard from Louis Gustin. I'm impressed by his boldness, his courage for having surmounted an accident that in so many people's lives would almost signal the end. But for him, it was a starting point, if I can put it that way. And it's absolutely remarkably managed on your part. So well done, young man. But I would also say how impressed by his European mindset that he had as he was a boy. He was born in an area where the European Union was born, if I can put it that way, and he is still animated by this enthusiasm, and that throughout his entire career, despite his disability, and possibly that's been fueled by his disability, which is absolutely praiseworthy. Now, yes, I was. I mean, you did direct a proposal to me, and you wanted to become an ambassador. Dear colleague, I'll be delighted to help you to that end and to become an ambassador, a fascinating job. And when you do represent European civil service as a handicapped person, I think you should be an ambassador. No, I have no direct powers in that realm, but there are colleagues in this auditorium who are here, and I'm convinced of the fact will come forward and go to speak to Mrs. Lalieu about your proposal. It's very rare that the Belgian government has ever turned down an active, dynamic proposal going to European integration. So I would imagine that your ideas have a great success, have a great potential for success. Civil service, there are always 1,000 obstacles, aren't they, that appear. But I suppose that's quite good, because when there are none, you can imagine nothing will fly. But, you know, if you are persevering, it means you're on the right road, and you need and you will have help. I think he's proven that he does persevere, so it should meet with success. Thank you very much, Sophie Klusell. Would you like to say a final word or on that point, or shall I thank our speakers on the rostrum? Okay, well, thanks very much to everybody on the panel. We're now going to leave the stage so that we can move on to Sophie Klusell's concluding remarks. Before I leave the stage, I would like to pay thanks to everybody who has prepared the format and substance of this conference. You may not have seen what's happened in the wings, but I can tell you it's been very busy. Thanks to everybody who've been an interpreter or a technician, French, English, Spanish, Italian, but also sign language and reporters. Thanks very much. And now we're off. Over to you, Sophie, dear Minister. Over to you to wrap up the conference.
Eh bien, merci beaucoup, mesdames et
Ministers, European Commissioner, who's going to be joining us again. Ladies and gentlemen, many thanks to Sophie Massieu, our journalist, our moderator, and many thanks to Louis Gustin for his testimonial, for sharing with us his hands-on experience. This brings us to the end of today's discussions. Thank you very much for your contributions. The goal is to concretely improving the lives of PWDs, and ministers have talked to each other with PWDs, their representatives, but also non-profits, institutions, agencies. So it is important to bring the people that we're trying to help together at the table. So we heard about experience in the field. There are 100 million PWDs in Europe. We have also exemplified the major advances achieved by the previous strategy and also the next strategy that we will all rely upon so we can move faster and stronger together. We said it over and over and over again. The key to independent living is universal accessibility, universal access to all amenities, all services, so that PWDs can fully participate in society. So universal accessibility is something that we need to develop further, because this improves agency of PWDs, access to education, training, job training as well, but also free movement, a right that everybody's entitled to, whether in your own country or between EU member countries. The rate of employment of PWDs remains lower than that of the rest of the population. And this is true for every EU member state. It is because up until now we haven't been able to ensure equal opportunity from the earliest age. So we are catching up, as we said before, in terms of lifelong training. And so we need to get better. We need to work harder so as to improve inclusive education. Also, we need to showcase our successes, such as Erasmus. Everybody is involved in the Erasmus programs. And this young Italian woman talked about her experience, and sometimes something puts a spanner in the works and stops emancipation and empowerment of young PWDs. So we need to promote free movement for everyone in the EU. This is how we all live together. So the Erasmus program has a specific budget, 26 billion euros. It's more environmentally sound, it's more innovative, it's more inclusive. It includes a specific management. This includes additional costs that directly relate to PWDs as well as their carers. This is a major inroad, so we need to keep it going. We need to rely on that success story. We need to roll it out further. How do we facilitate medicine management? When you go away to different countries, part of the Erasmus program for 6 months, how do you handle your meds? How do you ensure reciprocal management of the requirements for assistance for each student? We also need to make it easier for people to land in a different country. So we suggest in France that a disability officer be appointed at each embassy. Well, not necessarily create a position, but identify a person who will perform that task, identify where rehabilitation services are available. Every embassy knows that information. So a disability officer should be identified or appointed at each embassy so as to support reasonable assistance to PWDs. So against the backdrop of the future employment package that should be initiated in 2022, a major driver for improving employment of PWDs is to change the way that employers look at them, particularly the work collective, colleagues, for example, the working environment, the rest of the team. We need to raise their awareness so as to fight discrimination. So let's look at the skills and the abilities of PWDs as opposed to their disabilities. They are doing things differently and seeing things differently. They are differently abled, as they say in English-speaking countries. So PWD should be seen as persons, not as persons with disabilities. So due day is a real opportunity. I think we all agree on that. So let's roll it out further. Now, this is the 35th week of full PWDs. We're going to organize that in November. This should be a major driver for improving PWD rights. And the second edition of Due Day as well, because everybody here, employers, workers, the media, everybody has identified that as a major stepping stone. But we need to do things right and talk about what you're doing right. So this is a popular initiative. Let's use that as a stepping stone to change the way people think. We talked about job coaching, assisted work, to facilitate inclusion. There were examples coming from Luxembourg. Now, professionalization is an opportunity to create new professions that'll provide assistance to PWDs. Make sure that assistance is fraught with meaning. Make sure it's sustainable. We need to provide assistance to PWDs so they can find jobs, but also hold on to their jobs, despite the many disabilities that may suffer from mental health disabilities in particular. Employers are just employers. They're not medical professionals. Sometimes it's difficult to understand the disability that the person is faced with. So we talked about many things, including the necessity to make NDD research a priority for the EU. Together, we go further, we move faster. And as we said over lunch, it is possible and is necessary to include PWDs and their carers and their loved ones around the table so we can move faster. Make sure they have access to compensation, streamline the red tape, automate the processes, no longer single out PWDs, but instead mainstream them. The EU cannot afford to deprive itself of this lifeblood. This has been a busy day. Many thanks to all of you for your contributions. Disability is something that transcends borders, boundaries. It's everybody's business. We're all involved, we're all affected, and we're all on board. Disability. When we advance that cause, it is society at large that moves forward. Thanks to your contributions, your suggestions, your proposals, your statements, your beliefs, you have been able to show very simply that this commitment to the cause is everybody's business. I would like to close with Charles Gerdou, and a quote from Charles Gerdou. He says, "There is no such thing as a minuscule life. Committing to inclusive participation means choosing brotherliness," and this is a word that has special meaning in these difficult times. Thank you.